Hey there, and welcome to today's episode of the Vineyard Underground podcast. This is your host and viticulturist, Fritz Westover, and today I'm joined by Alice Wise from Cornell University to talk about vineyard floor management and particularly how concepts and best practices for vineyard floor management have evolved in more recent years. And Alice has been following trends and successes for grape growers in Long Island, New York, and across the Mid-Atlantic in general with her extension and research roles. And I know you're going to be fascinated with what she has to share today. So, Alice, thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Hey, Fritz. Nice to see you, as always. Not
Yeah,
often enough.
not often enough. I need to get to Long Island more often, I guess. So, Alice, let's see. You and I have known each other for years. When I first met you is when I started working with Tony Wolf back in Virginia Tech. Gosh, that was probably back in 2005 now. And I was always fascinated with the program in Long Island and the research you're doing. Can you tell the listeners a little about your background and how you got interested in viticulture and what your work has focused on at Cornell?
Okay. Well, actually, I went to graduate school with Tony Wolf. So we were both products of Bob Poole's lab in Geneva, Cornell University. And I felt really privileged. It was a really good group of people. Helen Fisher would be another one,
Yeah.
Andy Reynolds. There were a lot of significant people that came out of that lab. I'm not saying
Right.
I'm one of them, but
Oh,
um,
but you are.
no,
Yeah.
no, no. And so then at that point, so my interest in viticulture stemmed from I was a greenhouse. I thought I was going to be managing a greenhouse. That's what I majored in college. And then we had a gift exchange at the restaurant where I worked because I had to work all through college. And someone gave me a bottle of wine. And I had been serving wine as a waitress. And I said, look at this. And it just kind of snowballed from there. When I applied to grad school, I made my application so it could have been construed as being interested either in greenhouse or viticulture, and they threw me into the viticulture pool, and that was that. And in terms of Long Island, I thought, after grad school with Bob Poole, there were a couple of options. Some were in tree fruit, some were in grapes. But Bob said, "Look, just go to Long Island and you know, get your feet wet." I had a cousin that had a vineyard in Napa, and I thought I had grand ideas that I would go out there and not work for him, but be introduced and find a job out there. But I went to Long Island, and then I immediately met my husband, a vineyard manager, and that was that. So here I am
Right.
38 years later. So what I have focused on, and this is based on requests from the industry, was plant material, so variety trials, as well as looking at low impact methods and ways to be good stewards of the environment. Long Island is surrounded by water on three sides. We have very sandy soils that sit atop our aquifers. So all our drinking water comes from underground aquifers. So we have to be very cognizant of what we do in farming. And in fact, it's probably one, if not the most, but one of the most regulated places in the country in terms of pesticide availability. And that's because it's an effort by both the federal and state government in particular to protect our resources.
So let's get into floor management and how it's changed a little bit. Growers realized that maybe there were some other options at some point. Um, what were growers looking at after a while, and why did they change? Because from what I understand and from my conversations with you, it's not like it was when you started, right? There's
Correct.
probably a lot of different methods being used. It's not just all herbicide or cultivation. So
Right.
why did growers decide they wanted to make changes? What was the incentive or reason?
It was a whole bunch of things happening at once, I think. Um, the realization, I think, that we needed to really focus on things like groundwater protection. There were not due to vineyard use, but historically they had found herbicides in our groundwater. And so that kind of elevated that whole issue into the idea where, well, we need to be really a lot more careful with this. And then I think just a desire on the part of both growers as well as the wine drinking public. We have a lot of, I don't want to say high end, but, sophisticated wine drinking public that come out from the city, and a lot of them are very, environmentally aware.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the combination of things kind of nudged everybody into the direction of, do we really want to be practicing this particular brand of flora management, or other ways that we can reduce herbicide use alternative methods. And, quite frankly, with things like glyphosate, there were sommeliers in the city who were asking wine salespeople and winemakers, does your farm use glyphosate? So there's, there's been a whole combination of things that have moved the industry in a different direction, as well as the realization that we don't really need to have a pristine strip underneath lines.
The other thing that you were instrumental in which was pretty innovative at the time in the Eastern United States, was the sustainability program. Did you want to mention a little bit about that when that came on in Long Island?
Sure. That, oh gosh, that's actually why I hired Libby, my previous technician.
Mm-hmm.
So in 2002, the State Department of Environmental Conservation officials literally walked into my office and said, "We've got money and you're going to do this." And at the time, there were sustainable programs on the West Coast, nothing yet on the East Coast. And so Libby and I produced the first set of Long Island guidelines. That got folded into some things that viticulturist Tim Martinson was doing in the Finger Lakes. We kind of merged it all into the Vine Balance program. Mm-hmm. But that's been, in fact, I was working on revising some of the guidelines just prior to this podcast. But that, I think that the utility of that is not absolutely you follow the guidelines and you're sustainable. It's that it makes you think about what you're doing and say, oh, yeah, maybe that particular thing I can work on next year. And it also, on Long Island, facilitated a lot of interaction and community.
Good. Yeah.
Some arguments too.
And making decisions based on data-driven decisions, sampling your soil, sampling plant tissues so that you're only fertilizing if and when you need to, with only things that are necessary for plant health.
Yeah, one simple thing we did in the guidelines was, there were some vineyards you'd walk in and the grass strip in the middle would be 3 feet wide, while under the vines, it would be 5 feet. And so we kind of we put guidelines in place saying that you don't need to have such a wide, if you're going to use cultivation or herbicides, you don't need such a wide strip under vines.
Can you just briefly describe how a lysimeter is used, what it does? It's primarily for research, of course.
There are different kinds. The ones that we used were kind of a long PVC pipe with a clay tip. Mm-hmm. And so these were installed maybe, 3 or 4 feet down, and then, had a cap on it. And so we would go in, you'd have to go in after a rainfall and suction out the water that leached in through the clay cap at the bottom. And then we would have that tested for nitrates.
Okay.
And, those worked most of the time, except when the tractors ran them over.
There's always the tractor factor.
Very hard to install directly under the trellis wire in an existing vineyard. So, we lost a few that way.